Welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! History with Joe Giorlando. In today's video, we are going to profile the second combo control deck from the summer of 2012, Inzektors. We've already profiled Windups, specifically the Windup Hunter Loop variant of Windups. That deck is a deck I would classify as combo control because it absolutely has combo elements. Obviously, the Windup Hunter Loop that was incorporated into the previous deck profile is absolutely a combo, but it still has control elements. Windup Factory, Windup Rabbit, Windup Rat, and the ability to grind out your opponent. The second deck during that summer format that I think would be classified as combo control is Inzektors. It didn't take a lot for Inzektors to OTK you out of nowhere. In many cases, all it took was Call of the Haunted, Injector Dragonfly, and then one combo piece from a Inzektor Hornet to an Inzektor Sword to an Inzektor Gigamantis. It did not take a lot to combo out of nowhere, enabling you to activate Inzektor effects multiple times. If you didn't play back in this period of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, Inzektors really, once they were printed, for about a few years, honestly, were a deck that you would always fear because what's unique about the Inzektors relative to some modern cards is Inzektor effects are not once per turn. If you were to equip not only just Hornet to an Inzektor Dragonfly or Centipede, but other equipped cards like Sword and Gigamantis, if you were to destroy those equipped cards, that single Dragonfly or Centipede could activate 1, 2, 3, 4 times a turn, depending on what cards you had access to. So this deck really out of nowhere, by putting together the ability not only to use the Dragonfly's innate effect to equip something like a Hornet from the graveyard or from your hand, but also utilizing additional equips like Sword and Gigamantis, could pull off these really elaborate OTKs, oftentimes ending with either a huge board or simply just dealing 8,000 damage, which is why I would also consider this a combo control deck. It absolutely could combo you. It took very few cards to actually combo out of nowhere, assuming your opponent didn't have any resistance. But at its root, at just what it is when you read some of these cards, it seems a lot like a control deck. I'll summon a Dragonfly, summon a Centipede, equipped Hornet, pop one of your cards, incrementally build up card advantage. And it definitely had that element. Certainly not every game played out like that, but it had that. It could transition from a combo deck, setting up an OTK out of nowhere, or a control deck, depending on the situation, which makes this and Windups the two combo control decks during the summer of 2012. Inzektors itself as a deck is an interesting one because if you look just at that 6-month period of time, this deck saw a lot of evolution. At the beginning, people really focused on Centipede and Dragonfly. Soon thereafter, at the beginning of the summer format, cards like Sword became more popular. Sort of in the middle stages of the format, Billy Brake popularized a version that incorporated Safe Zone. Safe Zone was a particularly interesting card choice because it protected an Inzektor monster. That's just what Safe Zone does. But if Inzektors stay on the field for an entire turn, it's very hard to lose, particularly if you have access to Hornet or Dragonfly. Because if you start a turn with an Inzektor on the board, you get the equipped of Hornet from the graveyard, a destruction effect, and then a search. Then you have a normal summon, and now you have 2 monsters on the board. That second monster that you just summoned probably has an effect that can continue your combos. And Safe Zone itself was also a really good card against one of this deck's worst matchups, Dino Rabbit. Dino Rabbit traditionally has a difficult time dealing with cards like Spirit Reaper. Well, Safe Zone basically turns all your monsters into pseudo Spirit Reapers, assuming your opponent doesn't have those very specific outs like MST. By national season, we saw certainly a little bit of that Safe Zone variant. We also saw other variants emphasizing, again, that Sword combo, Call of the Haunted. The deck profile today is a version that's going to emphasize Call of the Haunted. It's not going to have any Safe Zones in it, but commenting on Safe Zone in the beginning, hopefully we'll put that into context. One of the reasons why you may have elected to run Inzektors during this format when there were other combo decks like Hunter and the Windup Loop, or even decks like Dino Rabbit and Chaos Dragons, is I actually really like the Inzektor side deck. Inzektors, the way they're built, enable you to run cards like Goes in Match and Rivalry of Warlords, more so Goes in Match. The difference really fundamentally between the combo control decks of Windup and Inzektors are the side options. There are no floodgates, no good floodgates for the Windup deck. They're all different attributes, they're all different types. That's not the case with Inzektors. They're all dark, they're all insect. It enables you to run floodgates like Goes in Match, which can cripple not only Dino Rabbit, but also the Windup matchup. You also could incorporate cards like Messenger of Peace. Messenger of Peace was a card popularized by Billy Brake. I'll talk a little bit about it in just a few moments. But with Messenger of Peace, you could activate this card when your opponent has Lagia or Dolka on the board. Assuming you baited out the Lagia negation, or maybe Messenger's doing it for you. And if they just shotgun Dolka, it absolutely just enables you to stall out a little bit. And it allows you to leave this card on the board as you incrementally build up the cards necessary to break the Dino Rabbit board. Or you can slow down the Chaos Dragon matchup, for example. There are a lot of decks that had very few outs to Messenger of Peace, beyond things like MST, Raikou, and Lila, which seems like a lot, but if your opponent's focused on a Messenger of Peace, it means your Call of the Haunted's probably going to go through, which means you might just OTK them anyway. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that in the side deck. We've talked about the 2012 format a few times already. To me, there's really 7 decks going into Nationals that you had to worry about. There's Dino Rabbit, which we already profiled, with or without Macrocosmos. Windup Hunter Loop, which we profiled very recently. This Inzektor deck that we're going to talk about today, and a few decks that will be coming in the future. We'll absolutely be profiling Chaos Dragons in the near future with Chaos Sorcerer and like Pulsar Dragon and all of the others. We'll eventually profile Dark World and the various versions of that existed during the summer of 2012. I made a comment in relation to Final Countdown in the previous video. We might talk about Final Countdown eventually. It wasn't super popular, but it was a deck in 2012 for sure. And then the final deck was Heroes, which is absolutely on the way. I promise my Long Beach deck profile will be coming very soon. But those are really the big 7 decks. Inzektors slotted in closer to the combo side of it, but also, as I alluded to a few moments ago, the control side of it. So without further ado, this is an example of an Inzektor deck that you absolutely could have encountered at the summer 2012 US Nationals. All right, we'll start the deck profile with 3 copies of Inzektor Dragonfly. Dragonfly was limited to 1 at the end of this format. Although Inzektors themselves didn't necessarily have overwhelming success at the US Nationals or at YCSs throughout the summer of 2012, Inzektors absolutely dominated World, and they absolutely still had success at those YCSs. They didn't really win any of them, but they topped a bunch, so as a result, one of the limitations that we saw at the end of the format was putting Dragonfly to 1. This deck was really one of the only times in Yu-Gi-Oh's history until somewhat recently that this deck had access to both 3 Inzektor Dragonflies and 3 Inzektor Centipedes. You essentially needed access to one of these in order to get your engine going, because Centipede can of course search Dragonfly, Dragonfly can special summon Centipede, and once you have access to one, assuming you have something like a Hornet or Ladybug, you have access to the entirety of the 6, continually searching them. Very rarely would you actually need to go through all 6 over the course of the game. Sometimes just one turn of combos combining just a couple of them would be enough to win. But this deck had the advantage of running all 3 copies of Inzektor Dragonfly and 3 copies of Inzektor Centipede. This deck maxed out on Inzektor Hornet. This is another one of the cards that was eventually limited at the end of the format. This deck really needed to access Hornet as fast as possible. Later versions of this deck emphasized Inzektor Ladybug. That would eventually trigger a Centipede effect and search the single copy of Inzektor Hornet when it was limited. This deck, because there was no limitation on Inzektor Hornet, just maxed out on Inzektor Hornet. This deck, in the early stages of the game, really needed to access Hornet as fast as possible. If you don't have Hornet and you don't have Dragonfly, this deck doesn't really do a whole lot. That's why we max out a full 3 copies. Now, in theory, once you access 1, the other 2 are a little bit dead. There's some utility in the sense that if you absolutely need to normal summon a Hornet and equip a Hornet from the graveyard, you can do that. It's not exactly all that exciting because you're not really generating a search off of it, but you are destroying a card, which can be valuable. So we're still going to max out on the full 3. This deck's also running Allura Darkness. It is a level 3, combines well into making rank 3s. Theoretically, if your opponent were to side in DD Crow, having access to more than 1 copy is obviously ideal, because if they DD Crow 1 Hornet, you can just simply equip a 2nd or a 3rd Hornet. So there was a reason to run 3. Past that are the singleton Inzektors. The Inzektor Gigamantis was really important. 1, it was a level 6, which was really useful. This deck actually had the ability to go into rank 6s because the level of Inzektor monsters will increase when you equip them with some of the Inzektors. So for example, you can equip an Inzektor and boost its level by 3, and then all of a sudden have 2 level 6s on the board, Inzektor Gigamantis, and then an Inzektor equipped with another Inzektor monster. For example, 1 equipped with Hornet. So that was useful. It also was just a combo piece. As you're going to see when we start to talk about some of the combos and some of the play sequences that you would see, the ability to have cards in your deck like Gigamantis and then eventually Inzektor Sword enabled you to trigger extra searches on the turn that you first initially activated some of these effects, which in oftentimes would result in OTK. So Gigamantis, a really important card, a lot of OTK potential with Gigamantis. And then I think it's useful to run at least 1 copy of Ladybug. Some versions of this deck will run multiple copies. And then honestly, after Hornet was limited, it was very common to see this in a full 3. Ladybug was useful because it gave this deck a lot of flexibility. This deck generally had access to rank 3s because all of the Inzektors are, for the most part, naturally rank 3 other than Gigamantis. That's at least before Ladybug was printed. So 3, 3, and 3. You could theoretically get them up to level 6 if you absolutely wanted to, and then use Gigamantis to go into a rank 6. But what Ladybug allowed you to do is equip it to a Dragonfly, increase Dragonfly to either a 4 or 5, get a Centipede, equip Centipede to either a 4 or 5, and now you have 2 monsters that are either ranked 2 level 4s or 2 monsters that are level 5s. And then from there, you obviously have access to a variety of different Exceed monsters. So that single Ladybug and just having it in your deck enabled a variety of different plays from the extra deck. In addition, on the first turn, it also enabled you to use the effects of Centipede and Dragonfly without having to destroy a card on the field. Hornet needs to destroy something on the field, and if you go first, your opponent's obviously not going to have anything on the field, so it limits what you can do. If you were to open Ladybug, though, or maybe even a Foolish Burial to put Ladybug in the graveyard, you could just summon Dragonfly or Centipede on turn 1, use the effect by increasing one of their levels with Ladybug, and then get a search, which can set you up on the following turn. It would establish a monster on the board that your opponent would need to deal with, or else they're just going to lose out to that Centipede or Dragonfly on their next turn. And in addition to that, you would search another normal summon for the following turn, or maybe you didn't have access to Hornet and you would search a Hornet. Or maybe you didn't have access to a sword and you thought a sword would put you in an advantageous situation. So the ability to use some of these Inzektors effects on turn 1 was really important, which warrants at least one, if not ultimately more, copies of Ladybug. I think this deck already had a lot of monsters, so I only have 1 copy here, but I could very easily see 2 being the proper number. 3 I think is a little bit overkill, but maybe 1 or 2. From there, other monsters. It was really common in this format to run the full 3 tour guides and a Sangan. I have a little bit of an issue thinking back to this decision because I think this deck already has a lot of normal summons or monsters that would take up your normal summon, and having tour guide might be a little bit redundant. Theoretically, though, you get tour guide, you search Sangan. This is one of the few decks in the format that ran Call of the Haunted, so being able to detach a Sangan off of the Leviathan Dragon and setting Call of the Haunted on the opening turn is actually a pretty reasonable play. Being able to search out Sangan and crashing to search either a Dragonfly if you need it or a Hornet if you don't have access to it, I think is also pretty reasonable. My only issue here is I think Mystic Tomato does just about as good of a job. That might sound awkward because Mystic Tomato is in many ways the budget version of Tour Guide in this deck, but I actually think Mystic Tomato might have been equally as good. But that's a story for another day. We'll talk more about the Mystic Tomato versions of Inzektors when we talk about what this deck looked like after limitations. But in the summer of 2012 national season, absolutely going to see 3 copies of Tour Guide and Sangan essentially be the standard. Granted, this did enable you to pull off some interesting plays that Mystic Tomato wouldn't be able to. Obviously, you can go into rank 3s, but this deck can really utilize the access to rank 3s when we consider the fact that this deck is running double Effect Veiler and at least Black Luster Soldier. I would, no matter what, include these in an Inzektor deck. You probably should have some degree of hand traps. In this build that I'm showcasing right now, I'm not going to have Maxis. I'm at least going to have Effect Veilers, though. One of the main reasons why I think this deck utilizes Effect Veiler more than Maxi, or better than Maxi, is that when you use Effect Veiler as a tuner, you can use it with basically all of your level 3s to go into Armory Arm, and then Armory Arm plus Black Luster Soldier is 8,000 damage in most cases, so it can OTK out of nowhere. And what often could happen is you could special summon Black Luster Soldier by banishing the only light monster in your main deck. Now granted, you do have Giga Brilliant from the side deck, or rather the extra deck, so you could access it just by having rank 3 access, which was really easy. But often if you're able to banish an Effect Veiler and another Dark Monster, doesn't really matter, you would be able to use the fact that everything's a level 3 to go into Leviair to bring back the Effect Veiler from the banish pile, and then all you need is a leftover level 3 on the board, and that's Armory Arm BLS, which is 8,000 damage under most conditions, and I'll describe what that OTK looks like if you're not familiar when we talk about the extra deck. So I like the inclusion of Effect Veilers, and honestly, Tour Guide does a better job enabling this interaction than Mystic Tomato, so that is something to consider. And then I think it's useful to run a single copy of Dark Arm Dragon, giving this deck sort of 2 quote-unquote boss monsters. Dark Arm Dragon does a lot more than what you might typically expect. You might just look at this deck and be like, yeah, there's something like 17 or 18 Dark Monsters. Sure, put Dark Arm Dragon in, no big deal. One of the ways that this deck actually won the game was to utilize Centipede and Dragonfly as many times as possible because they're not once per turn. And if you destroy equip cards attached to them, even beyond the natural one that you might use with their effect, you can trigger their effects multiple times, and Dark Arm Dragon was a fantastic way to continually destroy cards on your side of the field, particularly equip cards attached to these in order to trigger their effects multiple times, anything from a Gigamantis to an Inzektor Sword. So yes, Dark Arm Dragon can clear your opponent's board. Yes, Dark Arm Dragon's a threatening card. Maybe under most conditions you can lure it away if it's dead. And honestly, this deck can even manipulate Dark Arm pretty well by equipping a card from the graveyard, bouncing cards with Inzektor Sword. All that is true. But Dark Arm Dragon was especially useful because if you were able to drop it and have it just sit there on your board, you could continually banish cards to destroy cards in your field, to trigger your Inzektor monsters, and almost guarantee victory. That will make a little bit more sense when we talk about some of the spells in this deck, and then I sort of big picture look at how this deck really functioned by talking about some of the combos. Because honestly, Mystical Space Typhoon, although a useful card against something like Windup Factory, a decent card for opening up back rows, for clearing out things like Fiendish Chain, just a generically useful card, obviously not great against the Chaos Dragon matchup. It in and of itself was actually a combo piece, although you don't necessarily want to draw this against Chaos Dragon. It has utility because you can destroy your own equip cards, triggering, whether it's a Gigamantis, whether it's an Inzektor Sword, whether it's a Dragonfly effect or a Centipede, and then combo off an OTK. And what's interesting about MST is it's actually pretty useful because you can use this in battle phase. Obviously, it's a quick play. Effect Failure needs to be used in main phases, so you could actually trigger Inzektor effects in the battle phase to play around your opponent's Effect Failure, which was really useful. I'll describe some of the combos, quote unquote, and really one of the ways that Inzektors primarily functioned once we finish talking about the deck profile. But Mystical Space Typhoon clears our back rows, but also a combo piece. People went back and forth on whether or not to run Inzektor Sword during this format. I was always a big fan of it, and then once the limitations occurred to Dragonfly and Hornet, it basically became the staple in 2. I'll showcase some of the things that Sword does in a little bit, but I think having access to this searchable combo piece that also warrants a space in the context of the grind game as well, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, definitely deserves an inclusion. From there, we have just a bunch of singleton power 1-ups. We have a Foolish Burial so that we can tutor out often Hornet if you don't have access to it, Ladybug if you don't have access to it yet, but sometimes you actually tutor out either a light monster to go with BLS, which would be Effect Veiler, and then sometimes, honestly, even Gigamantis, because you can equip Gigamantis from the graveyard using an Inzektor effect on the board, and then OTK through a variety of means. So Foolish Burial was a reasonable inclusion. We had one Dark Hole. Dark Hole was basically a staple at the time. We have the other mass removal spell in Heavy Storm. Book of Moon was a good way of baiting out Dolkas and Lagias. It was a great way of responding to Windup Zenmati, a great way of responding to monsters in the mirror match. Again, at Nationals 2012, format has already gone away, so Book of Moon was really at its peak in terms of playability. We have an Allure of Darkness. This deck is essentially all dark monsters minus the effect failures. This deck also utilizes Levia really well. So banishing something like a Dragonfly and summoning Tour Guide, or just honestly summoning another Dragonfly and going through the iteration of Dragonfly Search Centipede can enable you to special summon an Inzektor from the banished pile. So Allure of Darkness was partially a combo piece beyond the fact that it also could clear out some of your dead draws. Like, for example, let's say you draw 2 Hornets or 3 Hornets and you want to get rid of one. Well, that's why you have Allure in the deck. And then Monster Reborn, really one of the only main extenders that was universal across the board in this format. It was honestly one of the most powerful cards in the format. I say exclusive to this deck because several versions of Inzektors differed in the trap lineup. One of the traps that I actually rather liked was Call of the Haunted. This one's a little bit debatable because you have to be really safe and protective with how you use this card. If you just set it in the mirror match without an Effect Veiler in hand, without Book of Moon, without warning, they're going to pop it in OTK you, so you can't set it under those conditions. But what this does is it gives you an incredible follow-up, but it's also a combo starter in some cases. So let's talk a little bit about what Call of the Haunted can enable. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, you had Call of the Haunted set. It can start your combo because what you could do is your opponent might set a couple cards in their back row, and during the end phase of their turn, you can flip your Call of the Haunted and special summon out a Dragonfly. The reason you would do it during your opponent's end phase is if they just set Warning or Torrential or any of those type of cards, Solemn Judgment even. Well, they can't do anything about it. They just set it, and you did this end phase. So now you enter into your turn, give your opponent the window to Book of Moon, you activate the effect. Let's say they Veil or Fiendish Chain, like there's their window to do. But if they don't have any of that stuff, let's say their back rows were in fact Torrentials, Solemn Warnings, Solemn Judgments, those type of cards. Well, then great. Use your Dragonfly effect and equip the Hornet and destroy their set, let's say Solemn Judgment. And now Dragonfly activates and you bring out a Centipede, equipped it, destroy something else. Maybe at this point we have to start comboing by destroying our own cards. But once you then use that Centipede effect, now Centipede gets to search your deck for another Dragonfly. And because it all started from a Call of the Haunted, you can now summon the Dragonfly, equipped it, and now all of a sudden you're going to put 4 monsters on the board. And honestly, at this point, it's very hard not to win. All you need is Sword or Gigamantis in order to win from this point. And let's just say even having Dragonfly in your hand already. So let's say you didn't actually have to search the Dragonfly off of the Centipede that just activated. Instead of searching a Dragonfly, then let's say you already have it in your hand, we'll just search the combo piece that would actually OTK, like a Sword. Again, when I finish talking about the trap lineup, I'll talk about what Sword and Gigamantis actually enabled in this deck if you're not familiar with this format. But Call of the Haunted was a really powerful card because it started combos. It also helped act as an extender. Let's say they Torrential your Centipede, they Torrential your Dragonfly. Flip Call, now they have to deal with this. Let's say you open with Tour Guide. Tour Guide gets Sangin, Sangin crashes, you search Hornet, Call the Haunted Sangin, crashes, get Dragonfly. Now you have Dragonfly Hornet, which under a lot of conditions is going to be game. So Call the Haunted worked really well with all of what this deck was trying to do. You just had to be very cautious with how you used it. You didn't want to give your opponent in the mirror match the opportunity to destroy this. You also needed to be cautious about setting it in opportune times. But when you timed Call the Haunted effectively, it basically won you the game. So I actually really liked a full 3 copies of Call the Haunted. This was something that we would see in later versions of Inzektors, and it would actually be the standard going forward once some of the limitations occurred. During the summer format, you did absolutely see Call the Haunted, but it wasn't quite a staple. It's something that I think was proper, though. Then in terms of protection traps, we had basically what was a staple at the time in everything but Chaos Dragons and sort of rogue decks like Final Countdown and Dark World. We had double Solemn Warning, double Torrential Tribute, double Bottomless, and a Solemn Judgment. It's really important when we look at trap lineups like this that a deck like Dino Rabbit, which you already profiled, could run cards like Dimensional Prison, maybe even Mirror Force to a lesser extent, and feel okay about it because the deck has things like Lagia that could negate a normal summon of a Centipede or a Dragonfly or even Dolka, which just totally outright negates it. If you're not running those type of cards, though, you'll notice a lot of the decks at this time didn't run cards like Deep Prison in the main deck because the Mirror Match, or even just running against Inzektors if you're not running a Mirror Match, was so backbreaking. If you said Deep Prison, your opponent's just going to summon a Dragonfly, summon a Centipede, and destroy it, and you can't activate Dimensional Prison there. You have to obviously wait for an attack, and that never was going to happen. You're never going to have the opportunity to Deep Prison. So a lot of the trap lineups at the time had Warning because it was good against every matchup, had Torrential because it was good against every matchup. Most of the time you could afford to put a Bottomless in there because worst case they summon Dragonfly and pop this, search Centipede, and if they don't have a combo extender from that point, they're not going to OTK you and it at least stops Centipede. And then Judgment was basically a staple at the time. So this was a pretty typical example of what a defensive trap lineup looked like at the time. Cards like Deep Prison would be more common in the side deck. Again, unless you're running a really trap-heavy deck like Dino Rabbit. But this is what the typical trap lineup looked like, plus the Call the Haunted that I think was actually a great inclusion. Let's talk a little bit about some of the interactions in this deck if you're not familiar with sort of generally how this deck works. And why I kept talking about, oh, you just OTK your opponent. Well, how do you just OTK your opponent? Well, what this deck really tries to accomplish is putting together a turn where you activate Dragonfly and Centipede as many times as possible beyond just their natural effect. So what I mean by that is when you summon a Dragonfly, for example, and you have Hornet either in the graveyard or your hand, it doesn't really matter. Let's just assume it's in the graveyard for the sake of discussion. The most simplistic understanding of Inzektors is the basic idea of, okay, I equipped Hornet, I kill one of your cards, I search Centipede, I equipped kill one of your cards, I put a Dragonfly in my hand, and I'm ready to do it on the following turn, and maybe I'll go into a rank 3 like Zenmains. That's actually a pretty reasonable interaction. You had one card, plus maybe 2 cards of Hornet had to come from your hand. You cleared out 2 cards, you went into a rank 3, and you have a normal summon for the next turn. That's actually pretty good. If your opponent doesn't stop you, I have no issue with that. But that doesn't necessarily win you the game outright on that turn. Everything changes, though, if you add one of these 2 cards either to your hand or as a search. So let's talk a little bit about what we could do if we have one of these cards in our hand. So let's go back to this part. We equipped the Hornet on the Dragonfly. Let's say we kill their one back row. Let's just say for the sake of discussion, we killed one of their back rows, and now we start Centipede. But in our hand, we have either Sword or Gigamantis. Well, we'll use the Centipede and still equip the Hornet. But now what we'll do is we'll actually equip either Sword or Gigamantis to one of the 2 Inzektors that are on the board. The reason we do that is Inzektors are not once per turn, nor are they once per copy either. So if you, for example, equipped a Gigamantis with its own effect, which allows you from hand to equip it to an Inzektor, let's say you equipped it to a Dragonfly, you then can use the Hornet to destroy your own Gigamantis. So now this is what I was talking about earlier when you start to destroy your own cards. The motivation there is when you do that, now you're actually triggering both of these effects, which means you're about to get another search from your deck off of a Dragonfly, which means you can now summon a second Centipede to the board, right? Because Gigamantis was equipped to the Dragonfly and was sent to the graveyard, triggering its effect. You also get the Centipede effect, so now you get to search your deck for another Inzektor card, let's just say Sword for the sake of discussion. Technically speaking, this Gigamantis now activates. If this was honestly your graveyard, I wouldn't activate its effect right here. I would save it for later in the turn, but that's a totally different story. But just for the sake of discussion, if you had another Inzektor in the graveyard, like let's say earlier in the game you had a Dragonfly in the graveyard, this Gigamantis now activates and special summons an Inzektor from the graveyard with its own effect, and now all of a sudden your board is at this point already filled, and neither of these have activated the effects, and you just search the Sword. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, you had nothing else in the graveyard, so I'm actually not even going to use Gigamantis. I'm just going to leave it there, and I'll show you why in a sec. Let's continue our combo. Let's activate the Centipede, bring back the Hornet, equipped here. Now let's use the Sword and equip it back to the Dragonfly. Now I can use the Hornet to pop the Sword. Sword activates, adding Gigamantis back to hand. Dragonfly activates, summoning another Inzektor from the deck. And Centipede activates, adding another Inzektor from the deck to the hand. Let's just say, for the sake of having different names, let's just add an Inzektor Ladybug. But now you can sort of see where this is going. Now I can use this to equip a Hornet. I now can use Centipede from its hand and equip it maybe to Dragonfly. And if at this point I actually want Inzektors in the graveyard, let's go into a rank 3, just so that I can put an Inzektor into the graveyard. Let's just go into a basic one like Leviathan. And in doing so, what I'm going to do is I'll be putting an Inzektor into the grave, a different name Inzektor into the grave like this. And then when I shoot the Gigamantis goes to the graveyard this time, and I will use its effect because I put a Centipede there. I'll now get another search off this Dragonfly. Look at how many times we've used this Dragonfly. All in this turn, I've actually run out of Centipedes, so I'll search my deck. I'll start getting rid of dead Hornets. I still have a search off of this, so I'll search another Dragonfly for the following turn. And you can sort of see where this is going. The ability to activate cards like Sword and Gigamantis and make it so that you trigger Inzektor monsters multiple times in a turn basically made it so that all you really needed to OTK was a Hornet in the graveyard, a Dragonfly, and then any of these two combo pieces. And they were really easy to access. You know, you could start searching throughout the game, some of the pieces with Centipede. I talked about earlier how Call of the Haunted sets you up for pulling this off as well. And this was really what the deck tried to accomplish. It was a combo deck, a little bit of a controlling deck if it needed to, because it could just focus on destroying your opponent's cards. But it was also a deck kind of like Windups, where it was almost like trying to avoid the dam breaking playing against this deck. You're like, okay, I have to stop everything they're doing. The second they get one push through, it's probably game, because the Windup deck would discard your whole hand. This deck would combo off and basically just deal 8,000 damage. So when playing against this deck, it was really important to never leave a window of opportunity for your opponent to OTK you. But the problem in a lot of cases was, especially in game 1, you had a lot of dead cards like Deep Prison potentially in your deck. Again, it depends what you're running. I even mentioned how some trap lineups compensated for that. But if you just set one card and they have Call of the Haunted set, great, you torrential their first summon, but they flip Call and then they just OTK you like I just described. So sometimes you couldn't invest on the board. So you really did have to play this game of trying to keep the dam from breaking, and sometimes that meant setting Warning and Torrential and saying, you know, if you have Heavy Storm, I'm going to lose anyway, because the way your deck functions, if you have some of the extenders, there's not much I can do about it regardless. Just to talk a little bit about a few other comments I made during the deck profile. Why else is Sword just a pretty reasonable card? Well, on turn 1, you could go Summon Centipede, equipped it with Sword. And against Dino Rabbit, this was actually a reasonable opening, because it would boost this to 24, and the Inzektor player, once they reach that 24 threshold, is no longer fearful of Lagia and Dolka. Lagia would crash, Dolka's not even enough attack. If the opponent opened Rescue Rabbit and they were going to use that effect, they would have to go into Utopia and attack over it, and then in doing so, these would both go to the grave. Sword would now activate, and you'd actually bounce the Centipede back to hand, and you could just summon it on the next turn. Now, you can't equip a Sword from the graveyard like that, but nevertheless, you still made it so that a Rescue Rabbit used its effect in the least useful way for the Rescue Rabbit player. So that's one thing that this interaction did that was pretty good. Another thing that I commented on during the profile that I should just briefly talk about. Imagine we go back to that situation where we just have a bunch of cards equipping to one another. We've cleared our opponent's board, and now we're just continually destroying our own stuff. Well, if you just had a Dark Arm Dragon chilling over on the side, you could start having cards equipped to your Inzektor monsters and just use the Dark Arm to pick them off, triggering their effects multiple times. And then in addition to that, actually fueling your banished pile so that you can start overlaying into Leviers. Quite frankly, if you had Dark Arm on the board, but basically any Inzektor that could use its effect, you're going to end up winning somehow. The ability to just continually at will destroy Inzektor cards that are equipped and trigger their effects is just game breaking. And then I made this comment, but now that you've actually seen the advantage of killing your own stuff in this deck, again, imagine those scenarios where you know your opponent is effect fairly, you really need the Inzektor effect to go off. So you have it equipped with something like a Ladybug, and you're afraid to use the effect here. Because generally what would happen is you'd summon this, and you'd activate the effect, and your opponent would generally wait for the Inzektor to actually be equipped to the monster, because sometimes you equipped cards from your hand as opposed from the graveyard, and if they equipped a card from a hand, that could be advantageous to your opponent. So let's say you equip this, and then you entered your battle phase, and you just MST'd this, and now activated your Dragonfly's effect. They kind of lose out that window on effect veiling. Some people might just effect veiler there anyway during the main phase 1 because they might figure out what's going on, but it is worth noting that MST allowed you to make these cool plays in the battle phase that your opponent might not necessarily be expecting. So that's something to also consider. We'll first talk about the extra deck before talking about the side deck. I think the extra deck is an interesting one because there's definitely some decisions that need to be made. The first card that I think is absolutely essential, no debate about it, is a copy of Armory Arm if you're running Effect Veiler, and then obviously Leviair that basically combos with it. I commented on this while doing the deck profile, but if you're not familiar with this interaction, I will briefly talk about it. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, we sort of over the course of the game had access to some of these cards. We Effect Veilered something earlier on in the game. Oh, I'm actually missing BLS. But you Effect Veilered something early on in the game. Let's say you have a Inzektor that's just kind of hanging out, but now you summon Tour Guide, and you go and you get anything from a Sangan to another Tour Guide, doesn't really matter. And you go into Leviair. For this to work, we need another dark monster in the graveyard, so I'm just going to throw another dark in the graveyard. But we're at this game state, and we banish these two, a light and a dark, to summon Black Luster Soldier. Then we detach off the Leviair to bring back the Effect Veiler, and now we use the 3 and the 1 to go into Armory Arm. Then you equip the Armory Arm to the Black Luster Soldier. This will deal 8,000 damage under most conditions, because what this does is, let's just say for the sake of discussion, your opponent has a Leviathan Dragon that 2,500 attack, and no other monsters. If you declare an attack with Black Luster Soldier, the difference between 4,000, which is its new attack when equipped with an Armory Arm, to 2,500 is 1,500. But then Armory Arm's effect kicks in, which deals damage equal to the attack of the monster that it destroys, which means then they take an additional 25, which means 25 and 15, it's actually 4,000. Then Black Luster Soldier has the effect where it can attack again. It has 4,000 attack. It could then attack directly for one full 4,000 attack. Swing, 4,000 plus 4,000 is the magic number, 8,000. That's a direct 8,000 game. Let's just say for the sake of discussion, your opponent had 2 monsters on the field. Well, it does the exact same thing. The math works out the same. This does 15 and then 25. This does 14 and then 26. The difference there is 8,000. So if you were able to go Armory Arm Black Luster Soldier, you could steal games out of nowhere. Your opponent would basically need to have a monster in attack position or a defense position monster not to just outright lose. And even then they might lose because this is still 4,000 plus 26. Even though it's in defense mode, you still take that 2,600 attack difference or just the 2,600 static attack. You just don't take the attack position difference. And that's still a big chunk, obviously. Or they need all defense position monsters. Still a lot of damage, though. Or they just have no monsters on the board, and it's still 4,000 direct, which is pretty good. And that can also play around Gores pretty well. So the Armory Arm, I think, was absolutely essential if you're playing the Effect Veiler. If you're not playing the Effect Veiler, I can understand why you wouldn't use it. But you do typically also have Giga Brilliant in your extra deck, so I could understand why you would still include the Black Luster Soldier. But the next card I guess I'll profile is the Giga Brilliant. I think Giga Brilliant was useful. Some people played a second Leviathan, but I think having the light and then also being able to pump your whole board, as you saw, you could basically always get 5 monsters if you really wanted to. So yes, there's a difference between the 2,100 and the 2,500, but if you have 5 monsters on the board, the Giga Brilliant actually has a higher output. So I think that card was absolutely essential. I think Acid Golem was essential at the highest level, highest attack rank 3 that you could access, so very useful. I guess I'll talk about some of the bigger ones in just a sec. Let's finish the rank 3s. Zen Mains might have been the best rank 3 at the time. Tempo was super useful against other Acid Golems, against Zen Mains. Not that your opponent would really want to go into Zen Mains against you, but nevertheless, Tempo, a really useful card. Forces out things like Lagia negations. If they don't stop this, then you can just activate this on Lagia. So those were, I think, the most useful rank 3s. We'll go to rank 4s briefly. The rank 4s are a little bit debatable. I think Maestroke is in the probably column. I'm going to kind of rank this by definite, probably, debatable. Maestroke's in the maybe pile. I think it was printed, Papuloperative, I think is how you pronounce it, or Papulo-operative. I could totally see not running it. It's not necessarily the greatest. I think Roach is definitely in that maybe pile. This deck can access rank 4 so easily, I think it might actually be warranted. So it's definitely a maybe, but one that you would probably end up including. I always liked the Utopia package in this format, so I would be totally fine running that Utopia plus the Utopia Ray, OTKing out of nowhere. Unlike the Windup deck I recently profiled, this deck doesn't have mind control, so it's not like you can take advantage of taking your opponent's Utopia and then just overlaying into your own Utopia Ray, but nevertheless, still pretty useful. From there, the other things worth debating, you could add another Leviair. I point that out now before I get to the high rank monsters, because this deck, with some of those combos I just described with Dark Arm and BLS, could win out of nowhere. I would argue that if you have access to that, you probably should be able to win already, so I'd understand only running one Leviair. Then in terms of big ones, We definitely need some rank 5s. I think the best two were Tiras and the Ninja, the Shadow Ninja. This deck I don't think obviously needs Adrius because one, Adrius was best against cards like Spirit Reaper and Floodgates, and this deck can just kill Spirit Reaper with Inzektor monsters. And the best Floodgate against this deck was either Skill Drain or Shadow Imprisoning Mirror, and Adrius doesn't do anything against either of those. So I don't think Adrius was needed. I think Tiras was just better for what it could accomplish. I think Ninja was actually pretty decent because you could stall out on it for a little while. A lot of players elected to run this. And again, we're going into rank 5s through Ladybug. I should make that point clear. I did say it in the deck profile, but that is how we're getting to these sort of unusual levels. A lot of people ran Photon Bouncer, and I think that's an absolutely perfect decision. This is essentially this deck's version of Lagia Dolka type effects. It can negate monster effects specifically. This deck can go into level 6s by going into Gigamantis and then equipping an Injector with the Hornet, producing 2 level 6s. That sounds a little convoluted, but it actually wasn't all that challenging to do. So Photon Bowser, I think, was a totally reasonable inclusion. I think you could have considered running Exabeetle. It was probably the Inzektor monster that had the best effect. This and Excastag are probably the two that you could debate. I remember I'd sometimes run Exabeetle. And then there was Gaia Charger. This deck with the high rank monsters could theoretically run the Gaia. It is a piercing. Otherwise, you don't really have that type of effect. So in terms of the ones I think are essential, I think these 7 here are essential. I would probably have run these. I probably would have run, at bare minimum, these. So just to quickly review how many we have already here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, which means you can pick 2 from this bottom level. If I was going to run this deck at a YCS, I probably would pick these 2, honestly. The combos with this card are actually really fun, so it'd be too bad to cut it, but I think these 2 are probably the better ones. Utopia is a pretty decent rank 4 to stall out, but I think Maestrik has a little bit more utility. And if I'm running a bunch of rank 5s, I do kind of want that piercing effect. So that might be what I would end up deciding, though quite frankly, that piercing might not be as valuable because this deck could probably just kill your opponent's monsters and then you don't need the piercing. So I guess there could be a debate there. But that is the extra deck. Let's finish off by talking about the side deck as we typically do. For the side deck, again, let's just briefly run through the decks that you could anticipate playing against. I commented on this in the Windup deck profile, not the Dino Rabbit deck profile from about a month or so ago, but Final Countdown by Nationals was actually a deck that you'd have to worry about. I sided cards in my Dino Rabbit deck at the 2012 Nats for it. So Final Countdown, obviously the mirror match was really popular. Dino Rabbit, typically running macro in the main, but that wasn't necessarily always the case. There was Dino Rabbit variants, Chaos Dragon variants, of course. Those were really scary. There was Dark World, which was a top deck at the time, maybe a tier 2-ish deck, a little bit of a rogue deck. It was popular, but not overwhelmingly popular. I actually did play against it round 1 of that Nationals. We have Windups, which we pretty recently profiled, and then we have Hero Beat. I really think these are the top 7 decks. And in order to counteract some of those, our side deck is going to include 2 copies of Raikou. Raikou is really useful because the cards that beat Inzektors are cards like Dolka, maybe to a lesser extent Lagia, and then Floodgates like Macrocosmos, and then Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. As a light monster, this deals with Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. It doesn't deal with Skill Drain against heroes, but it does deal with Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. It deals with Lagia, obviously not Dolka, but if your opponent opens Macrocosmos Rescue Rabbit, they're almost always going into Lagia Macro. I almost basically always did that. Raikou is a good out to that because you set it, and then you have the option of killing the Lagia or the Macrocosmos, whatever you think is useful at that point. So Raikou, from the perspective of a Dino Rabbit player, was one of the most annoying cards to play against. You basically needed Forbidden Chalice to totally invalidate Raikou or wait for your opponent to flip it and use Warning. Neither of those are really all that great. So Raikou, I think, was a really useful inclusion. It was just one of those cards that could pick off some of the nuisances that your opponent could have in their deck in Game 2. I don't think this was particularly popular, but if I went back into this format, I would include 2 Mystic Tomatoes in my side deck, not my main deck. And that might sound like a really weird side deck choice, but after Game 1, if your opponent had Mirror Force or Deep Prison, they're siding them out. Which means in Game 2 and 3, you should be able to crash Mystic Tomato without any resistance whatsoever. There's no reason those cards should be in your opponent's deck. Tomato itself wasn't overwhelmingly popular, and those cards are just asking to be destroyed by Hornet in the first place. Honestly, Game 1, you shouldn't even set them. You should just pretend that you didn't even draw them and just leave them in your hand. Setting them makes it more likely for you to lose because your opponent can just destroy them freely with Hornet. However, in Game 2 and 3, those cards shouldn't be there, which means Mystic Tomato can freely do whatever it wants. This card comboed really well with Call the Haunted in the deck because if you had Call Tomato, you go Summon Tomato, Crash, get Sangin, Crash, get Hornet. Whether it's that turn or a later turn, flip, call, get Tomato, crash, get Dragonfly, and now with Call Tomato, you fueled Dragonfly Hornet, and if you were able to pull that off without using your normal summon, like let's say Tomato was set, nobody attacked it, they were afraid that it sang and they thought it was Dragonfly, they just never did anything to it, or they, quite frankly, even just did attack it and you searched Sangan, and now you have a Sangan on the board in attack mode. On your following turn, you can crash that Sangan and then do that iteration. But when you call the Haunt of the Dragonfly and start to use its effect, when the Centipede comes out that was summoned off the Dragonfly, and then that one searches the second Dragonfly, you will have saved your normal summon, and you can combo off without normal summoning, and then use that normal summon of that Dragonfly, probably to pull off an OTK. So I really like Mystic Tomato. I would argue it might even be better than Tour Guide in this deck in some cases, but in the side deck, I think it's a pretty cool card because it puts a lot of pressure on decks like Chaos Dragons because they don't have a lot of resistance. And you can set it. It's kind of an annoying card. They have to Raikou it maybe. They can't Chaos Sorcerer it. A little bit of a nuisance. I think it's really good against heroes. Yeah, they have a lot of outs to it, but if you set this, are they going to just blindly Gemini Spark it? Well, maybe not. They might not anticipate this being your set. So a little bit of a nuisance there. It doesn't play around Skill Drain in an awesome manner. Obviously, its effect still goes off, but the Inzektors you search down. So it might at least bare minimum stall out against Skill Drain for a little while. So Tomato, I think, would have been an interesting inclusion. A couple of Max Cs was basically standard, typical. As you're probably well aware now, Windups, a deck that's going to special summon and take your whole hand. We want a card like Max C. Billy Bray popularized Messenger of Pieces in the side deck. I think Messenger of Peace was an interesting inclusion because the purpose of this card was against Dyna Rabbit to potentially bait out a Logia or a Dolka that they had on the board. Honestly, with Dolka, you don't even have to bait anything out. Bait out something like a Logia and then just activate this. If your opponent doesn't have one of their MSTs or Heavy Storm, what it's going to allow you to do is wait to draw the cards necessary to break your opponent's board and then OTK them. As you saw, this deck has a lot of OTK potential because even if they have Dolka, if you just activate this, they can't do anything. They can't attack you. All of their monsters have 1,500 more attack. It lets you sit there and incrementally draw some Call of the Haunted. All right, sweet, I got a Reborn now. I have my Dark Hole. I'm not going to use it yet. I'm going to wait a little bit. And then once you feel like you can OTK through infinite back row and hand traps, you can just do it. And at the beginning of that turn, you can just stop paying for the Messenger of Peace. Or, even better, leave it on the field. Start your combo. See if it is in fact going to go interrupted. And then just Hornet pop your Messenger of Peace once it's clear you no longer need it. So it had that cool ability to remain on the board, start your combo, and then decide mid-combo if you actually wanted to clear it out or not. So Messenger of Peace was fantastic. It was also really good against Chaos Dragons. Granted, they had Lila to destroy it, which was a little annoying. Maybe you can Warning that, Book of Moon it, avoid that. They did technically have outs. Raikou 2 is typically in that deck, so they had outs to it. It wasn't a guarantee. But if they didn't have those type of outs, you could just activate this and sit there, and they could have all the big chaos monsters they want. You're fueling the cards eventually to OTK them. So Messenger of Peace, fantastic inclusion. I like double Gozen match in the side deck, at least. Double Gozen match. Unbelievable card against Windups. Windups can't really do much with this on the board. They can basically go Shark, Shark, Zen Maddie, Shark. That doesn't really do anything. Or they can go Shark, Shark, Leviathan Dragon. Big deal. They basically have to live with their Sharks who are water. Zen Maddie who's water, and Leviathan. That deck is not going to beat you with just those cards. You'll eventually draw your combo pieces. And even if you're forced to just stay with Dark Monsters, you're probably still going to win. In the extra deck, there wasn't an exhaustive amount of Dark Monsters you can go into, but it was another reason to consider running Maystroke. It's another reason to at least consider the Excavator, but I still don't think that's necessarily warranted. You wouldn't really want to go into Roach, but the options were at least there to have a few cards in the extra deck. That might be useful to make it so that the monsters on your board start to clear up. If you were doing those really big combos with swords and Gigamantises, being able to go into Dark Monsters, that made it so that there was more monster slots available was useful. So something to consider with the extra deck. And then from there, just some reactionary cards against something like Logia, Dolka, and then cards that are pretty good against a lot of decks. They're not overwhelmingly popular, but I actually think they would have been good inclusions. Compulses were fantastic against Windup Zen Maddie. You can just immediately activate it. Nationals 2012, priority is gone. And then Divine Wrath, I think, would have been a fantastic inclusion because from the perspective of a Dyna Rabbit player, I try to think of cards that if my Inzektor opponents actually used, what cards would have increased their win percentage. I legitimately never lost a match at a YCS, something like 13-0 with Dyna Rabbit against Inzektors, because they just never had these types of cards. They had cards that I don't think were all that difficult to play around. Divine Wrath, though, if they flipped Divine Wrath on my Logia, that would have been backbreaking because, as I alluded to, when you're playing against Inzektors, it's all about making sure the dam doesn't break. Or kind of like what a floodgate is intended to portray. The idea of, let's keep it back. The moment they break through this, though, they're going to win. And my opponents just never were able to break through it. If they flipped Divine Wrath on my Lagia, negating an MST on Macrocosmos, that would have been game over. So having a card like Divine Wrath in your deck, I think would have been really useful. Now, granted, a card like Fiendish Chain can do that, but I'm keeping cards like Lance in my deck too. Divine Wrath plays around that, and you don't even necessarily mind discarding a Hornet or a Ladybug or even a Gigamantis because you're probably just going to revive it through some of the Inzektor effects. And even putting a normal summon Inzektor like Centipede or Dragonfly in the graveyard actually can advance your game state if you eventually trigger a Gigamantis effect, actually making it more likely for you to OTK. And Divine Wrath has playability against things like Effect Veiler. So you can use it almost like a debunk, and when you make that one big push to OTK, if your opponent signed it in Effect Veiler, which was pretty common in the Dino Rabbit matchup, even if Macro was there, it was something I did, you could Divine Wrath the Effect Veiler and then push OTK and end up winning. So I think if players that ran Inzektors actually sided this, I know I would have been in a lot more trouble. So that's why I'm showing off a couple copies here. In terms of cards that were a little bit more common that I don't have included anywhere, Billy popularized Safe Zone. Billy Bray popularized Safe Zone in this deck. Technically in the main deck, though, I could see you theoretically side it. What Safe Zone enabled you to do is it essentially enabled you to summon an Inzektor monster, like a Centipede or a Dragonfly. Let's just say Centipede. Let's not get too crazy. And then when your opponent tries to kill it, attack it, Dark Hole, things along those lines, when it's attached to a Safe Zone, your opponent can't attack over it. Your opponent can't destroy it with Dark Hole. They need to kill the Safe Zone, which is really hard to do. They basically only have 3 MSTs in a Heavy Storm. And if your opponent can't deal with this, you can slowly but surely, incrementally, build up card advantage over the following turn, because then the next turn, all you do is, let's say you have Ladybug, you equipped it to your Centipede, use the effect, search a Dragonfly, maybe that's enough to win the game. Let's just say we do have access to Hornet, we can, on the next turn, equip Hornet to it, and we basically have this 1600 body that recurs Hornet every single turn and just starts picking off cards your opponent has. And yeah, maybe you do this once, you kill something, you search Dragonfly, and that's not enough to OTK it, because maybe they warning the Dragonfly. Big deal. You still can't kill my Centipede. Next turn, I'm going to equip it with Hornet, kill something, I'll search another Dragonfly. Eventually, they're going to run out of resources, because they're being attacked on 2 fronts. They have to get rid of your Inzektor normal summon every turn, or they're going to lose, and they have to get rid of your Centipede, and if you produce this game state, it's really unlikely that your opponent draws a card that can do both of these things perfectly. So once they run out of outs to the normal summons of the Dragonfly every turn, they're probably just going to lose the game. So Safe Zone was a really common card in some of the Inzektor decks, sort of in the middle-ish stages of the format. And because I haven't included it in either the main deck or the side deck, I did feel like I should at least comment on that as well, because it was another very popular card in the Inzektor decks during the summer of 2012. Either way, though, this is the Inzektor deck from the summer of 2012, a deck that really dominated more worlds than necessarily the national season, at least in the United States, but it was potentially the most popular deck of all of the decks during the summer of 2012, and obviously a really awesome combo deck, and a deck that, even after some of the limitations to Dragonfly and Hornet, was actually still playable. But nevertheless, this is Giorlando for Yu-Gi-Oh! History. Check back soon for more 2012 summer format deck profiles, and obviously a bunch of batches as well.